our speakers questions then. They'll definitely be available to you. All right, so our next speaker is Kenny Luck, and he's going to be speaking about sparking conversation through creative works. Kenny Luck is an author, documentary filmmaker, and third-year PhD student in human development at Marywood University in Scranton, PA. His books include Thumbing Through Thoreau, Nepa Ties, 101 Facts of Love, or 101 Facts. I'm thinking, I guess, in terms of names of course, the college courses. I do teach part-time, and I'm sorry, I have to say, my favorite commercial right now is McDonald's Millennials, am I right? And for all you millennials, I'm sorry. I'm not a millennial. Luck has directed 2 documentaries, Half Empty, Life in America's Unhappiest City, which went viral on YouTube in early 2016, and his latest is Opioid Nation, The Making of an Epidemic. Kenny has a wide variety of interests, including reading, fitness, cooking, traveling, and film. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Kenny Luck.
Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with me. I appreciate it. Before I get started, I just would like to say that it's an honor to be standing here right now. Back in the fall of 2012, I actually attended this conference as an attendee. At that time, I was working as a public relations coordinator for a university and had no idea what was in the cards in the future, that I'd be standing here about to tell my story. So I really would like to thank the organizers for thinking of me, and thank you, each and every audience member, for your attention in the next 20 minutes, and I hope you get something out of this. So today I'm going to be talking with you about sparking conversations through creative works. Now, a couple comments about this before I get started. Each person in this audience is an expert in something. So I didn't want to come here and educate anyone per se, but I wanted to take a very personal perspective on my presentation, because the creative works that I've done have sparked some conversations, and I think through that maybe you'll be able to take some information. So not to rehash, but a little bit about me and some of the work I've done. And again, I'm going to be addressing the conversations through my own works because that's what I know best. I started out as an undergraduate student as a political science major, which is interesting to have that background these days. And, I was a very literary person. I loved to read books, and I always just dreamed in college, one day I'm going to write a book. I want to publish something. I think a lot of people are interested doing that kind of thing. And by 2010, I had published my first book, which was called Thumbing Through Thoreau. And basically, it was a love letter to the author, Henry David Thoreau, because I was such a fan of his work that I went through his journals and started compiling quotes and things like that. The following year, in 2011, I published my first book that really started to generate conversations. That was called Nepa Ties, so it was a little bit of a pun on NEPA. Some of you might remember this. This book pretty much was about a lot of the controversies going on in northeastern Pennsylvania between 2008, 2009, 2010. If you remember, some of the highlights of the book were the Kids for Cash scandal, the fracking that started at that time, 2009, some of the things going on at the Catholic Church locally. So I really just try to cover everything. And it was a real just sort of snapshot or case study of certain events that were going on. And I think at that time, that's when this area started to become sort of in the national media a little bit. So that's why I became interested in covering these topics. And then finally, which I don't want to say a lot about, but my final book was a book called 101 Facts of Love, The Science, Law, and History of Love, Sex, and Relationships. This book was an attempt to sort of scour through a lot of the academic literature, which you'd be surprised in academic journals like social anthropology, psychology. There's actually a lot done on mating, and the science of this is really fascinating, and that's what that book attempted to do. But really what I want to talk to you today more about is my life as a documentary filmmaker and some of the conversations that the films I've recently done have started. So I don't know, you could show a round of hands. Does anyone remember 3 or 4 years ago there was a study that came out? It was a national study that said that northeastern Pennsylvania was the unhappiest region in the United States. Does anyone remember this? Sure. Okay, so most of you, all right, yeah. I remember this study, and when I started to get into filmmaking, I was like, geez, it was mentioned in the introduction, I'm a PhD student, I'm interested in social science, behavioral science, that kind of stuff. So I thought this is a really interesting thing to discuss because, I've been unhappy in my own life at certain periods. And the question that started coming is, how can an entire population be unhappy? So what I did in early 2016 was go around with some filmmaking friends and myself, and we kind of interviewed some people, and we just started talking about to get this conversation going. So when I put this thing up on YouTube, I was expecting that it would maybe have 1,000 hits. I thought this would be great if I could get 4 digits. This is awesome. Within a week, it had 10,000 hits. Within 2 weeks, it had 20,000 hits. By the end of 3 weeks, it settled in at around 23,000 views. People were writing to me. It went viral, and this was not what I was expecting at all because I had thrown this thing together during my Christmas break between semesters last year, and it completely blew away my expectations. So I thought, how do I follow this up? And so about 1.5 years went by, and we were talking about different potential other topics. And of course, everybody knows right now we're in the middle of a very devastating opioid epidemic that's been hitting not only northeastern Pennsylvania, but the rest of the country. So I recently put out Opioid Nation, The Making of an Epidemic, and within 6 weeks, this is about to hit 30,000 views in 6 weeks. So it wasn't quite as viral as the first one, but it's doing pretty good. I mean, I think 30,000, if anything, isn't a bad number. So getting back to my topic a little bit, I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between conversations and arguments, okay? This is something to think about. When you're putting something out, right, do you want to have an argument with somebody or do you want to start a conversation? Sometimes those two things can be very meddled together, and it's very difficult to separate them. Now, when I did Nepa Ties, which was one of the books I alluded to earlier, this was more of an argument. It was taking current events, but in the long form of a book, and sort of giving my take on what I thought the area was about and why these events are important. Opioid Nation, on the other hand, I was interested in creating more of a conversation. Now, we'll get into this a little later about reacting to negative feedback, but this also has a lot of arguments embedded with it. But it's important when you start a project to think about what your goals are, who you're trying to reach, and so on. So I just want to talk about Marshall Mcluhan real quick. This is so trite by now, but he was a social theorist in the 60s and 70s, and he has that famous line, the medium is the message. And it's something to think about because I've had experiences working in different mediums. I've written books and I've done documentary filmmaking. And the one quick thing I want to talk about with this is that, if you're writing a book, or in the previous presentation, if you're a blogger, you're going after a certain target audience. What I found in the book author world, it's a very small, insular group. Most people start out thinking, I'm going to be Margaret Atwood or Stephen King, and I'm going to have this great book, and I'm not going to have to work the rest of my life. The reality is, if anyone who's ever published anything, that's usually not how it works. So you do these things for the passion of it. But what I learned from the difference between being an author and creating films is that they have two totally separate audiences, and it just blew me away that when I used to go do book signings, on a good day, you might have 10 people show up. You might sell 8, 15 books. That would be a really good day. On a good day with a documentary, there's 1,000 views on YouTube. So it's something to think about. What medium are you using? So think about your platform. Are you doing digital versus print? Are you going to try to spark a conversation, or are you going to try to make an argument about something? This next point is really important. Long form versus short form. Obviously, if you're on the web, you want to be more short form. However, the exception applies to film. The reason it applies to film is because it's hard to get somebody to sit there and read a website for 30 minutes, but it's really easy if you create a good film to get somebody to sit there and watch something for 30 minutes. So, again, being visual, being engaging, I found filmmaking and video to be the way to go. Demographics, shelf life. How long do you intend for this work to last? The book that I did in 2011, it's a snapshot of that time period. It immediately became outdated within a year because these stories that I was writing about got updated, some of the constant updates. So it's almost like getting stuck in that time period. And whereas a film that could last a little bit longer. So that's something to keep in mind with these points. Target audience, ramifications, legal, culturally. One thing I just want to talk about is when I did Nepa Ties, there was actually a chapter, and when I dropped this person's name, everybody's going to know who I'm talking about, but there was a pretty controversial chapter on Louis de Naples, because I felt like I couldn't do a book about northeastern Pennsylvania and not talk about Louis de Naples, because everybody knows who he is. The publisher was okay with it, but I had people coming up to me, "You're crazy, you're going to get mowed down in the street, you're going to get shot, you're going to turn on your car and it's going to explode." None of that happened, I'm still here, but it was a controversial chapter, and I had to consider if there were any legal or cultural implications. This is a big thing. Again, I'm talking very broadly here, but when you're creating something, you have to think, these are the two cornerstones that I always think about when I'm creating a work. Content and form. Content and form. Content answers the what questions. What is your topic? What story are you going to tell people? What kind of narrative arc does it have? Okay, this is content, and this is one of the things to think about. Like, I have a lot of friends that are in the art world, MFA type people, and we have this discussion all the time. They're more artsy, so they're more into the whole form of things. They want to know how this artist created this. What is the color palette they're using? What is the relationship between spatial shapes in the picture, to use the art analogy? Okay, so that's format, structure. Depending on what medium you're using, is gonna change these things dramatically. Now, I do want to say something about content real quick. How do you get a video to get 30,000 views? It's a good question. I think these two things have to interplay with each other. Let me just take film for as an example. Form is good sound quality, the structure, the music you're using. Content, obviously, is the story. Opioid Nation, right? Big epidemic going on right now. I always heard this cliche one time in a journalism book, and I always remembered it's localize the national and nationalize the local. And I always try to do that in my work, because I always try to pick something that might have more national implications, but at the same time might say something about the current environment that I'm living in right now. So that is one way to do it that I found. Same thing with Half Empty. There was this national study. We ended up being at the top of this. Scranton is already kind of known because we had Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden from the area. We had The Office. So people kind of hear about Scranton once in a while. But using this national sample was something that I thought would really be a great local tie-in. So that's something I always keep in mind when I'm doing a project. How can I engage with local audiences, but it's not going to be stuck within a specific geographic location? So real quick on this, because I want to open it up, because my presentation is about conversation. So I'd like to have a real quick conversation, maybe a couple questions. How do you respond to negative feedback? I'm not going to read some of these because some of them are deplorable, but couple hours, I'm getting YouTube notifications. Somebody's commenting on the documentary. Now, keep in mind, this just came out at the end of August, and it's still going. So I don't know what the upper limit of this is going to be. But this is something when you're having a conversation, you have to think about all these things. Do you stay silent or do you choose to engage with these people? What kind of tone do you take when you do engage with them? You have to think about your own objectives and goals. Do you really think you're going to convince an internet troll that you're right about something? I usually tend to think no, so I don't usually engage with this kind of stuff. Free speech issues. Who's in control? And I put that meaning, are you in control? Is the content creator, or are you going to give control over to the person that's criticizing you? Which ties into the next thing, the affective network versus the cognitive network. In psychology, the affect is obviously emotion. Cognitive is our more logical part of the brain. And you have to think, am I responding effectively or am I responding using my logical brain? Or do you just take your mother's advice and smile and be nice? So those are some things. So real quick, I have a couple minutes here. I would like to open it up. I have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions. So does anyone have anything they'd like to say or any questions I could kind of dive into and take it from there? Yes?
How do you handle criticism?
How do I do it personally?
Feedback is one thing, but criticism is another.
Criticism is another. It's really tough, and that's why when I kind of put these bullet points together, I started to think, what are some approaches? Now, you're asking me how do I handle it, so I'm going to tell you. When I did Nepa Ties, I was very not savvy, I guess, with social media at that time. And what I mean is, I knew how to use social media, but I didn't know how to respond to people. So I used to engage in these sort of petty back and forths all the time with people when they would criticize me. Real shortly after, I'm like, I'm going to have gray hair or no hair real soon if I keep doing this. So personally, I just choose not to respond most of the time if it's negative criticism, or I look at what the content is of what the person's criticizing. For example, with the recent film, you know, you're working within constraints. You have budget constraints, you have time constraints. If I had millions of dollars and unlimited time, I would put out a flawless film. I don't have that. I'm a doctoral student. I work a couple jobs. I have a lot going on. So I had to work within my own time constraints. So not everything's perfect. Not every project you do is always going to be perfect. So somebody criticized me and they were getting into the particulars about filmmaking. Well, why did you make this decision? Why did you do this? And it kind of got a little personal. And then I clicked on this person's YouTube page and I saw that they had 2 videos up of questionable content, and it was made on an iPhone. I'm like, okay, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. So I just chose not to engage. So you have to kind of really pick your battles and think about whether you're responding cognitively or effectively. Yes?
So you started off like you said roughly around like 2011, right? So like, I mean, I don't want to get too like political with, but I mean, obviously, like, you know, it's a much more divisive time, I feel like. So you as a content creator in kind of like the current event space, how do you kind of like toe that line where you're trying to present a point and get your work out there, but or do you just like not care about like that?
Again, answering personally, it's a great question because we live in a very partisan, not only political but social period right now. I mean, my political leanings, I'm more on the left and whatever, but I try to actually try to present a more objective view because I was thinking about this the other day. I have a really difficult time being partisan, actually. I mean, I have my own opinions about things, but if I go out of my way and I really try to be partisan, it doesn't work for me. It's not part of my temperament. So actually, I think you may disagree with this. Some people may agree with this. I think by being more moderate right now actually stands out because on both sides, I don't mean Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. I mean across the board, people are fast to give opinions right now. So with Opioid Nation, bringing it back to the work, I felt like I took a pretty moderate stance on this issue. A lot of people didn't think it was moderate. So that's another point I wanted to make later on about what does our work do. I call it creating engaged dialogues. You know, it becomes a public good. It takes on a life of its own. People will interpret it however they want to interpret it. They're going to bring their own biases and opinions into whatever you make, even if it's the most subjective thing. But again, to answer your question, I do it by trying to take more of a moderate stance and let both people kind of fight it out. And once it's out there, they can kind of duke it out with each other. Yes?
Did you get any blowback from the Scranton Chamber of Commerce, the Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce, when you did your worst places to live?
Actually, it's a great question. Not from them specifically, but that generated a lot of discussions because people, I had no idea that issue was going to be something that would ignite anything. And some of the personal comments, most of them were good, some of them weren't, but people immediately started weighing in. Oh, this place sucks. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, this is the best place I've ever lived. Have you ever been to Youngstown, Ohio? That's worse. You know, people just back and forth over whether or not, and that kind of goes back to your question about, I feel like I like to create the work, put it out there, let people have their own discussions. One final question, just for the sake of time. Yes?
What if the work that you're doing generates nothing?
That's a good question. And how do you generate, maybe we can reframe it, but how do you generate work that will create something? And again, I think, real quick, because we only have 20 minutes, but, thinking about your medium, right? Is this work better as a blog post? Is it better as a podcast? Is it better as, a film? That's a good question because I've done some things that sometimes get no feedback at all. But I like to take more of a journalistic approach to things and pick topical issues that people are sort of talking about and tap into that conversation already. Really short on time, but thank you so much, guys. I'm going to be floating around during the sessions up at lunch. I want to thank the organizers again for having me speak. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you get a chance, Google or YouTube Opioid Nation, the making of an epidemic, or Half Empty. Use the hashtag Opioid Nation. If you'd like to have a conversation with me, I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And thank you so much for your time. And this has been a great pleasure. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenny. I have just a couple more things to say. It's really important to thank the people who do help to support us so that we can do things like this. We just want to take a moment to thank our partners who helped make this happen, NEPA BlogCon and the Squirrel Girls Tech Camp. Since the conference got started in 2012, NEPA BlogCon has worked with a variety of organizations to make this event such a great success. TechBridge has been instrumental in making BlogCon possible. As our partnering organization, TechBridge is dedicated to moving our region forward by asking the big questions. Why not here? Why not us? Why not now? TechBridge supports Northeastern Pennsylvania with a variety of resources for economic development and entrepreneurship. Their conferences, events such as the Innovation Conference, the Entrepreneurship Institute, and Business Plan Competition are always top-notch events. Follow them at TechBridge PA, visit them at techbridge.org, and be sure to tune into their podcast and radio show, TechBridge Radio, on Saturday mornings, 11:30 on 94.3 FM, The Talker. We've also worked with other amazing folks to make our Girls STEM summer camp success, which is really great work. The Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce, has been a fantastic partner. They provide space for us with their Think Center and in promoting our events to their members. Show them love on Twitter at GWB Chamber, Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber. We also have to thank the whole team at LIU 18. They're just superstars that have been amazing to help us. They gave us tools, technology, and assistance to make our camps fun and engaging. Follow them on Twitter at LUZIU 18. And finally, our last shout out to our friends over at Tech Bash. They run a world-class event and have been great supporters of our events since the beginning. Give them some love at Tech Bash on Twitter. And one other shout out for the party tonight at 5 o'clock. Just a reminder, it's the River Grill in Plains. So if you're interested in going, make sure you let us know. And now is the time for you guys to take another quick break, network, talk amongst yourselves, and share some great valuable experiences. Be back in 10 minutes for our third speaker, Lou Hastings, who will be very interesting. So take a break for 10 minutes, okay?